So today we're joined by Lisa. Lisa is an optometrist based in the UK and working for the association SeeAbility, and has been doing some great work with looking at children's vision and how that impacts their ability to use AAC. So a really important topic for us, and hopefully, well, I know you will find it to be a useful session. I've listened to it a couple of times and I still looking forward to listening again. So I'm going to hand over to you, Lisa. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shona and Kevin, and everybody for joining us this morning and listening. It's a great opportunity to share the experiences of SeeAbility and our work going into schools to look after children's eye care and how that can impact on their ability to communicate. So I'll tell you a tiny bit about SeeAbility, the organisation that I work for. We were the Royal School for the Blind, so we were an institution over 200 years ago for people with sight loss. With time, that has evolved to become that we still provide social care support, but that's now for people with learning disabilities and sight loss. The number one comorbidity, the number one association with learning disability in terms of health needs is visual impairment, and I'm sure that comes as not much of a surprise to you guys. I'm sure that's something you're aware of already. So it's really, really important that we understand the visual needs of people with learning disabilities. As an organisation, we work really hard on that public health message to get that message out to the public and to people who support people with learning disabilities, that they're more likely than not will have a visual problem. And we employ people with learning disabilities to go out and spread that message to make people more eye care aware. So I've told you that sight loss is the number one comorbidity of learning disability. I wonder if anyone would like to unmute themselves and have a guess at what the leading cause of visual avoidable sight loss worldwide is. Visual impairment. So visual impairment that we can correct. Is anyone feeling brave enough to come forward with a guess? Okay, well, I'll tell you, it's not what people normally say, which is cataracts or glaucoma. It's actually needing glasses and not having glasses when you need them. So it's what we call refractive error. So worldwide, that's the case, and it's actually the case in a lot of special schools as well. Certainly that's the data that we've collected. We've evidenced that to be the case in UK special schools. So children who have a learning disability, the children that we've seen in UK special schools, are 28 times more likely than their neurotypical peers to have a problem with their eyes. And those problems I'll tell you a little bit about, but as I say, one of the most common is that need for glasses. So it's a 50-50 chance if you're a special school student that you'll have a problem with your eyes. And it's about 40% need glasses. And the thing about that as well is it's often more complex. So it's particularly linked to prematurity, but we know that people with learning disabilities have much higher spectacle prescriptions. So the need for glasses is greater. It's not just a little tweak around the edges. They often have really significant prescriptions that lead them to be visually impaired without them. And they often also need more than one pair of glasses, which I'll sort of try and explain a little bit more about how that works later. So when we were all together in a room, we were able to try on some simulation glasses. And unfortunately, I can't simulate that for you now. But what I can do is say that 96 point that I've got up on the screen, if you have a significant refractive error, then that's blurred as well. For you sitting on the screen, looking at it the distance you're at now. So if you can imagine how disabling that is to not be able to see that size text. And that's what a lot of students have, and it's undetected. So I'm going to get you to try and just have a little go at testing your own eyes there in the, obviously disclaimer, this doesn't replace any kind of test, but it's interesting to see. So we have muscle and a lens inside our eye, which we use to accommodate or shift focus. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is just take a hold of a bit of paper or your phone or something off the desk and look at it so that it's nicely in focus, and then gradually bring it up towards your eyes to the point where it goes blurry. And that gives me a rough indication of how old you are typically. So if you're a young, so Shona's looking pleased because she got her phone very close. If you're a very young neurotypical child, you'll be bringing things right up to the tip of your nose. And gradually, as we age, that near point naturally, unfortunately, due to changes in the structure of the lens in our eye, that near point recedes away. Until we hit a point in our 40s where we're turning the light on and we're leaning back a bit and we're saying, oh, you know, this font is very small, the newspaper's not printed very well, or leaning back from our screen. And that's when we start to need reading glasses. And that's a normal in someone who's neurotypical. That will always happen at some point in your 40s, maybe you'll get away to early 50s. So everyone needs glasses by that point, unless their vision is compromised in some way. For our children who attend special schools, for children who have learning disabilities, they often don't have that ability to shift focus from birth. So we know that the strongest data is actually for the Down syndrome community. And we know that children with Down syndrome, 80% of them have minimal accommodation. So if you see someone with Down syndrome, you should be expecting them to need either bifocals, the glasses with the line across, or different glasses for different distances. And with autism, we know that rises to about 20%, 30% of autistic children need help with reading. And in cerebral palsy, it's around 30 to 40%. So again, if you've got a student who is using eye gaze and has cerebral palsy, you should be thinking, have they got glasses? And are those glasses for their screen distance? Because they may need a specific pair to be able to see a screen, or if they're using an iPad, to use their iPad. Another function of our eyes that you can test yourself is something called convergence, which is when we accommodate, when we shift the focus, we also pull our two eyes together. We go cross-eyed, as we call it. So you can see by looking at the tip of a pen, ideally, or your finger, what's the point you can bring it to before it splits into two. And that may be another problem with the eye muscles. They may be weak and causing double vision. So we may be able to only look with one eye. We also need to understand what our dominant eye is, and that's the same as well. All of this is really relevant if you're using technology to communicate with your eyes. You calibrate systems to either to both eyes or to a dominant eye. So it's really helpful if you understand how that works. So I'm going to show you how to test which is your own dominant eye as well. So I want you just to put your hands together to make a gun, and then point that gun up to the corner of the room, or a very defined point on the window, whatever it is, you can, an actual point. And you may find that you've revealed your dominant eye already by closing one eye to line it up. If you haven't, do that now. Close one eye and then the other, and you'll see that one eye is fully aligned there. That eye is your dominant eye, if you didn't know that already. So hopefully you've learned that about yourself. The other thing we do all the time, which is also illustrates how, if we have brain-based adapting issues and issues with visual processing, is something is we're ignoring double vision in every plane except the one that we're looking in. So I'm going to try and illustrate that to you as well by, if you just put one hand in front of the other with your fingers like that. So one finger's roughly sort of 15 centimeters away from the other. If you look at the front finger, you should see that you've got two of the back one one on either side of the front one, and then switch your focus to the front one, and you should see to the back one, you should see two of the other. So we're actually ignoring that double image all the time. So if that goes wrong, we can really have trouble finding things in space. So I hope you were able to do those little tests on yourself. It's much harder online than it is in a room, but hopefully it's still taught you a little bit about your own eyes. The other thing that's really important for you guys to understand, if particularly, with the eye gaze tech, is what type of eye movements we have. So quite a high level neurological function is what we call a smooth pursuit. So if you, again, put your finger up and move your finger across, you can smoothly track it. Try and make that same smooth pursuit without a target that's moving. And you actually can't do it. You can only make jerky movements. Some people just can't do that smooth pursuit, even with a target. And so that can mean that their movements are less accurate. And then the jerky movements that we talk about, they are called saccades. And if we look from one finger to another, we're making a saccade. If you can look at a student and say, are those movements accurate, or are they overshooting and having to readjust, or are they moving their head to get the saccade, to get the eye movement to happen? So yeah, they're the two main eye movements. Then we possibly have issues with ability to move the eyes in every direction if we've got weakness of different muscles around the eye. But there's certainly two things that you can observe in everybody. Are they able to do that smooth tracking pursuit movement or not, and accurate saccades? So I'm going to just to hopefully bring alive what I'm talking about. I'm going to just give you a case study of someone that I've met. As I say, at SeeAbility, we're part of a service now, which is an NHS service. It was a research project, but happily we're now funded to do this by our National Health Service. The service goes into special schools and provides eye care to all the students, and we write reports on every student so that we can share that with speech and language, with OT, with the class, with parents, so that everyone understands, with teachers for the visually impaired, if there is a significant non-correctable impairment there, so that we can support every student to make the best of the vision that they have, and that everyone understands what they can see. So this is a young man that I met a few years ago now when we started the work, when he was 15. He had his first eye test in school. He'd never been able to test. Mum said he couldn't have an eye test. It's very difficult getting him to hospital appointments. He was actually in a class with 2-to-1 support because of behaviours that challenge. And he had an autism diagnosis, profound deafness, and his mum said he had no useful means of communication on our history form that we were collecting information about Nathaniel. So to begin with, it was a case of I couldn't do everything about an eye test, but I was able to shine a light in his eyes and discover from that measurement, because our spectacle prescription is actually like the size of our feet. We can take a measurement and prescribe glasses. The bit you do when you go for an eye test, when someone shows you number 1, number 2, and reading the bottom line and making it clearer first or second, is actually really fine-tuning the prescription. The basic prescription we can take as a measurement, either with a torch across the room or on a machine where you put your chin in the rest there. So they're getting that starting point. That's what I did with Nathaniel. It was very approximate, but as soon as I shone the light, Nathaniel was born very early. As soon as I shone the light, I could see he was incredibly short-sighted. So all of his behaviours were put down to his autism. He didn't make eye contact. He wasn't confident. He was holding things very close, stimming very close. And all of those behaviours do fit in with autism. And that's something we sometimes call diagnostic overshadowing, where you assign behaviours to a primary diagnosis. And that happens an awful lot in people with learning disabilities. Everything, oh, he's doing that because he's autistic. And we don't consider that he could be doing it because he can't see. So Nathaniel was -18 when we discovered it, which is what that means is, if any of you are short-sighted, maybe you're 3, 4, 5, and you know that you can't function without glasses. -18 means that you can't see anything beyond 3.5 centimetres from your eyes. So everything beyond that is blurry. So without glasses, he would be registered as severely sight impaired or blind, the level of vision that he had and that he was living with up to the age of 15 in school. Thankfully, he got the glasses, he loved them. It wasn't easy to fit them initially because he didn't want anything near his face, but once he did try them with people he trusted, he was wearing them, he got used to them super quickly. And it really helped getting everyone around on board with that as well. So his mum and the school understood how much he needed them, and he needed them to be able to engage with anything educationally. And once he did, that was visual. And once he did, he started to use communication tech, and that's him saying he's using his bike and he can see with his glasses, he's happy. And, you know, people say he's a different now as a young man. He's at college, he's learned British Sign Language and he's fluent in it, and he's on a completely different path. And that was all for a pair of glasses. So, you know, it is literally, it's giving sight, so it's understanding that. So, you know, that's one of my key messages to you guys. If someone hasn't had an eye test and you don't know what they can see, make sure you sort of signpost them to get one. So I'm going to just tell you the conditions that we're most likely to come across, and the students and people that you'll be working with at Toby Dynavox, the most common health diagnoses and what ocular conditions you're most likely to get with them. And as you can see from this snapshot of a glass needing class, if everyone's had a test, needing glasses is quite common. All of these students here are glasses wearers. And in cerebral palsy, we talked about the learning disabled population having a 50-50 chance of a problem. If you have a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, it's 75% probability that you're going to need, that you're going to have some kind of a problem with your eyes. So, and of that population, 10% will have severe uncorrectable sight impairment. So 1 in 10, you know, will probably be relying on other sensory inputs other than vision. And yeah, that need for glasses goes up to 60 to 80% of people. And 60% of people with cerebral palsy will need glasses for different distances. And as I talked about at the beginning, may need screen distances. And you can see from that picture of Lara at the bottom there, or both those pictures, you know, screen distances can vary as well. So if you're seeing someone and they're using a screen at 40 centimetres, they're going to need different glasses to if it's at 70 centimetres. So you need to bear that in mind and make sure that somehow you're getting them in the glasses that that work for the distance that they're working at. And for us, prescribing and fitting glasses, it really helps to work in collaboration with the teams that are using the eye gaze tech, because again, if I use, because I know Lara in the photo at the bottom there, Lara can't move her head very well, so she's got quite a supportive headrest. So she can't use a bifocal or glasses that would need her to move her head up and down to get the screen in focus. So she has to have a pair of glasses just for her screen, and then another pair for when she's moving around school and when she's looking at the board. And then if she does things that are like if she's eating and things, she actually has another pair again. So it can be quite complicated. So do think, you know, if people haven't got more than one pair of glasses, there's a 60% chance they should have. So think about, you know, what's going on there. And if they haven't got any, again, you know, question that. I've come across students in the past who've been assessed by speech and language and deemed cognitively unable to access eye gaze communication because actually they were visually unable, and no one had considered that. So it's been put down to cognition and not understanding, when actually they couldn't see the screen when they were assessed. So just thinking, as well as cognitive ability to access, visual access as well. 50% of people with cerebral palsy will have a squint, an eye turn, or a lazy eye. What that means for you guys is that 50% of people need to be calibrated to one eye if they have cerebral palsy. So you need to know what the dominant eye is. What typically happens with squints, thankfully, is if we are getting double vision, the brain will learn to suppress one of the images. that's got advantages and disadvantages functionally. The advantages, we don't go around seeing two of everything, so we can't locate things in space. The disadvantage is because we learn to ignore one eye, we get what's called a lazy eye. So the brain is basically switching off the squinting, the turning eye. And that means that we need to know which is the good eye, because if you're trying to track both eyes, or you're trying to track the wrong eye, you're not going to pick up someone's responses. So 50-50, we need to know that we're just calibrating on one eye, and we need to know which the dominant one is. 20 to 40% will have nystagmus. Nystagmus is involuntary eye movement. I'm sure you've all seen that. I'm sure you're also aware that it varies depending on eye and head position, and also on how tired someone is and on a task. Typically, nystagmus increases massively if you cover one eye, for example. So we never test monocular visions as a clinician. We always test to see what someone can see with two eyes. It's not a barrier to using eye gaze tech. It does mean, accuracy is going to be affected, but something that practically is very useful for you guys to understand. We need to know if someone's typically with nystagmus will have what's called a null point, where the nystagmus is minimized. And for a lot of people, they'll turn their head or their face or their chin to get their eyes in the position where the movement is least. If you think about Laura, who we're just looking at in the picture, whose head's very fixed, I often come across students who have a null point. They're a wheelchair user, and with the best of intention, physiotherapists have lined them up so their head's nice and straight for their neck. But actually, the student's desperately trying to turn their head to look with their null point. So again, always ask your eye care practitioner, has this child got, if they have nystagmus, have they got a null point? Where should they be positioned so that you can put your screen to one side, you can allow them to face turn, you can put the screen up or down, but making sure that they're looking so their nystagmus is minimized. And again, these things unfortunately aren't mutually exclusive. So very often, if you've got nystagmus, you've got strabismus, you've got an eye turn. So you more likely than not with nystagmus, you're going to be wanting to monocularly calibrate, find the dominant, the better eye, and focus on that eye's movement. And that should help with your accuracy with tracking. And then 50% of people with cerebral palsy will have some kind of brain-based or cerebral visual impairment or visual processing disorder. So that means we all see the world differently. We all interpret the world differently. And this could be a whole other lecture. And it's a much under-researched and much poorly understood area. But the thing to understand is there's a spectrum of that. And, the kind of one end of that spectrum is to be completely cortically or cerebrally blind, so that none of the visual areas of the brain are functioning at all. And then that's going all the way through to people who see the world slightly differently. And there's lots of research in its infancy around that with autism, and how people with autism, particularly, sometimes the way I sometimes explain it is they can't be visually selective, or they can't see the wood for the trees or the trees for the wood. We've got different kinds of autism, which means they can't, their whole world is like a word search the whole time. They're constantly trying to zoom in on something, but there's loads of visual clutter and they can't focus in on individual elements in a scene. Or you have people who are the opposite to that, and they're the people more typically who are stimming, and they really trouble, they can't focus out. And then we have people with cerebral palsy who very often their brain-based visual impairment, the spectrum is huge and it's different with everyone. But again, it's not a barrier at all to using communication tech, but it's worth being aware of that people may struggle to understand things as quickly. And, we'll talk a little bit about adaptations for that. But in a nutshell, it's about keeping things simple. So minimizing the amount of clutter on a screen, keeping things big, bold, bright. But yeah, we'll talk about adaptations, because a lot of those adaptations for someone with a brain-based impairment are actually quite simple, as with glasses first, or with positioning, etc. Another thing that's very common in cerebral palsy, as we've said, is that often, we're missing that smooth pursuit ability. We're not good at moving accurately from one target to another, so the eyes move and then they move about a bit until we can locate something, sometimes with a bit of help from the head. Another thing that's incredibly common and incredibly underdiagnosed is, we call it a hemianopia, and that's partly why it has been diagnosed and it's written down somewhere, and people don't understand what a hemianopia is. Much more often we've heard of hemiplegia, when half of the body is paralyzed, but hemianopia often goes with that, but it can also happen quite often as well in isolation. And what it means is the whole of one side of the vision is lost. And people often close one eye and say, oh yeah, that must be bad. And, and then we say, no, stop, it's much worse than that. It's a line straight down the middle of each eye. So if anything comes at you, until it's at your nose, you won't see it. Again, people with a hemianopia will typically want to turn their face into their blind side so that they're less disabled by it. And obviously if we know that that's why someone's doing it, we can, we won't discourage that, basically. I mean, tell physios that that's what they need to do. And that will apply particularly, with the screen. And again, you'll want to position the person in rooms, in a classroom particularly, so that they're looking on their sighted side, so they're not on the wrong side of the room. So really important. We can't do anything to correct that, but if we're aware of it, we can make a massive difference to someone's quality of life. The other thing to bear in mind with field defects is they can also be vertical. So it is more common to be horizontal, but a really good example of a student that I met who actually had, he was walking around, hated transitions. That was what was written on his form, really bad at moving between rooms, really massive problems with mobility. He would walk along with his head right down. And the school for a long time had been supporting him by giving him 2-to-1 support for transitions. So a teaching assistant on either side, holding his arms and trying to lift him up so that he was looking straight ahead. What we discovered is that he had a hemianopia that was affecting the whole of his bottom half of his vision. And so he was trying to put his head down to use the top half to see where there was a step and to see the floor and to help himself mobilize. But with the best of intentions, this 2-to-1 support was actually aggravating the problem and getting him to not be able to see down. So he was struggling more. And once everybody understood that, he was able to put his head down, and now he's actually mobilizing much better, and he's supported to use head movements and chin in postures. So that made, understanding his visual need made a massive difference to that student, even though it was still an impairment that we couldn't correct. So a little bit about autism. 20 to 30% of people with autism need glasses. And again, it's around 10% need some additional help for the close-up, so they need more than one prescription. So in the general childhood population, that is only about 1%, if that, so much higher. And again, 2 to 3% needing glasses. So we normally say, it's 10 times more likely in autism and 28 times more likely in learning disability as a whole. With autism, again, double the risk of a neurotypical student of having a squint, a lazy eye, or an eye turn. And we've talked already a little bit about seeing things differently in that way that people process the visual image differently. A lot of that research I talked about is around eye movements, and it's really interesting. Autistic people we know do have different patterns of tracking and saccadic eye movements, and we don't really fully understand whether that is because they're seeing the world differently. It's a real chicken and egg cause and effect thing. Whether it's because of their visual processing that's causing, that's leading to different eye movements, or vice versa, whether they have differences in their ability to control their eye movements, leading to yeah, leading to them processing things differently. So still in its infancy, but just worth being aware of. These are our number one messages as an organisation. So often, even within my own profession, I hear people saying, oh, well, you can't test people with learning disabilities or people with significant autism, severe PMLD, because you can't make a full assessment of their vision. We always say no one is too disabled. Like I said, if you can shine a light in their eye across the room, then you can prescribe glasses. If you can, what we do in school with students who have, which is quite often, have fear of medical appointments and things, we'll pop into the class, we'll make ourselves a familiar part, regular part of the school team. They know us as the glasses team. We're not quite as popular as the guitar man, but everyone knows who we are. And that means that there's, the students reassure each other that they're going to see the glasses guys. And yeah, it's really lovely to see, actually, sometimes when you go into a classroom and they'll be like, it'll be fine, to each other, or shall I come with you? And that happens too. And, maybe you don't get a full assessment on a first appointment, but we'll see children, little and often, and build up a picture of their vision. So, yeah, we're really passionate about that message, that we can assess everyone, we can build a picture. And we support people in social care at SeeAbility who have come to us, perhaps from long stay hospitals and things, where literally no one knows whether or not they have vision. And, our vision is for that to be a historical thing, that people will, they'll have access to visual assessments through childhood so that they grow up being assessed. And so as an organisation, we're really passionate about educating our professions as well, to make them, and that's part of what we're doing, is this whole service going into special schools and being part of a team around a child, and then they go into the community and get something similar in adulthood because they're used to having their eye care regularly. Even if you do have reduced vision, you can benefit from using glasses. So this is a common misconception sometimes as well in the medical community. If we know that there's significant damage to the visual brain areas, there's a risk that we don't consider giving a significant spectacle prescription. There was a big systemic review of all the data, the evidence around interventions for brain-based visual impairment recently. And the one intervention that, well, there was two interventions that are shown to stimulate positive visual development. One was UV stimulation, using UV light in a dark room to stimulate vision. And the other was correcting refractive error, so giving glasses if they're needed. So if someone does have limited visual processing abilities, that is not a reason to not give them glasses. They should still be tested and given glasses if they need them, unless they are cortically blind. Because it makes sense if you're, the amazing thing about children's vision as well with CVI, it's a challenge, but it's also amazing. You can look at a scan of the visual centres of the brain, and it can look as if there's a lot of damage, when actually a child can be functioning visually quite well. And that's because of neuroplasticity. We've all heard about that now. If you see someone in their 70s who's had a stroke and a visual area is damaged, you can much more easily predict what problems they're going to have, because that's what that area does. So, for example, the ability to identify things visually, to name an object. And you can have these very specific visual agnosias, we call them. But in children, because there's so much neuroplasticity, the damage can look a lot worse than the actual visual function presents itself. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Oliver Sacks, the man who mistook his wife for a hat, or he has another book specifically around vision. But I'd really recommend Oliver Sacks if you find this interesting, that how we process things visually, and understanding these neurological challenges. But the key message to understand, even if you don't find it very interesting, is and you don't need to read Oliver Sacks, is still think about glasses, even if someone has a diagnosis of cerebral or brain-based visual impairment. The other myth that drives me a bit mad amongst my peers very often is people won't always go, oh, wow, I can see better, this is great. I talked about Nathaniel. He was very touch sensitive. It took a lot of support to get him to even try on the glasses. And then if you can imagine, you're getting a really strong prescription, often very late, with something that has to be on your face, and you're someone who processes things slower, a whole new view of the world, a whole new bit of neuroplasticity that you've got to be getting on with. So bear that in mind. People may reject glasses. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It takes time and support. A lot of our work in schools has been with OTs and with classroom assistants, putting on glasses for a little bit every day. And then we get to that tipping point where the student now is asking for them and is really keen to wear them. But to begin with, it can be quite overwhelming. So yeah, not giving up and not assuming. People assume, again, perhaps because someone hasn't had the test, the subjective test where they're reading the letters. I hear TA say a lot, well, he doesn't like the glasses. Maybe he doesn't need them, maybe they're not right, but it is from a measurement from the eyes. So it may just be that they're taking time to adapt and they need support with that adaptation. So as I said, we can test everyone, but the question I get asked is, well, what if someone can't communicate what they can see? So this is what I was talking about. This is the magic light that we use. We're basically looking at the red reflex. When you take a photograph, you get that red eye. That reflex, we wiggle our light around and hold up different lenses to measure the movement, and that way we can prescribe glasses. And that's what Ray's doing here. She's got a young man, Leon, in the background. He wouldn't have it done, so she's doing it to his teaching assistant there. And gradually he was convinced to have it done. It's a really old technique, so I put these pictures in because this is someone doing it in the outback of Australia, I think around the turn of the last century. The way you normally have it done yourself is you sit on the machine on the right there, and it's done in a couple of seconds. Where we have to use this really old-fashioned technique a lot in school, or with generally even in clinic, because it's hard to get someone to sit very still and get their eyes measured, whereas we can do that movement chasing someone around the room with the torch. So we're sort of still using that old technology, but one of our challenges is clinicians are sometimes now becoming slightly less skilled at that. So one of our key things is to keep that skill alive in the eye care community, because it actually works better than the auto refractors that you can see on the right there. This is looking into the eye. Obviously, we need to check to see if there's any structural issues with the eye or the optic nerve is very damaged. They're the cases when vision is likely to be very poor. Or they may also indicate that there might be a significant limit to the field of vision, for example. So that's part of the test that we do. We're checking eye movements. That's the classic pen torch, but you can obviously here we're doing it with a toy to keep it interesting. And we're looking for those things we've talked about, being able to carry out smooth pursuits, accurate saccades, converge to pull the eyes together, whether there's an eye turn, whether there's nystagmus. So which of those students has a squint? Is it both, or is it just one or the other? Typically, when we're in a room, most people will say they've both got a squint. But actually, it is only the child on the left, so the one with the green eyes. How can I tell? Because I'm looking, and you guys should know this better than other audiences, I'm looking at the corneal reflections, which is what the eye gaze is using. So the child on the right has got a very common pseudo diagnosis. We call it pseudo squint. In the folds of skin across from the nasal bridge are very prominent, so it's covering more of the white of the eye on one side than the other, so it's giving the appearance of a squint. When you shine a torch, you can actually see that those corneal reflections are in the middle of the black pupil. The other student on the other baby on the other side, conversely, you can see there's a reflection in their their right pupil, so the pupil on the left. The other one, the reflection, is way off the pupil. So for that, if that was someone you were calibrating for eye gaze, you'd be calibrating just to that, to their right eye, the eye on the left. Hope that makes sense. The other thing we do as well, if we can, again, you know, this isn't always possible first time, but obviously we want to be able to measure the level of detail that someone can see. That's called visual acuity. The way you will get it done is reading down a letter chart there, and you'll see those scores of 0 point something. That's a fairly universal way of doing it. The old American perfect vision is 20/20 because it's 20 feet. In the UK, we used to call it 6/6. Perfect vision on a modern logmar chart, we call it, is 0.0. So I'm mentioning that because if it says that someone has 0.0 vision, their vision is perfect on a report. If it says they've got 1.0 vision, that means they can only see the equivalent of the top letter, and that's the level at which we register someone as sight impaired. Doesn't sound good, does it? 0.0. It's not a very it always takes convincing when it's, wow, you got 0 as that's the top score, but that's how the charts work. If we can't do it with pictures and letters, we'll use what's called preferential looking. So we can do it on the right there. This is an app on an iPad that we use where you can pick out the odd one out that has the grating, and that can be with a touch screen. Be great to have that with eye tracking built in. And Cardiff cards, the traditional way of doing that. So you can see that student's looking up, and the pictures get progressively harder to see. So you can watch eye movements. These were developed preferential looking cards, particularly to assess babies. But obviously they also work in people who are non-verbal. So that's the way we get that measure of the level of detail that someone can see. And these are just some simulations of how, like I said, 0.0 is the perfect one up the top there. 0.5 is halfway down the chart, and we've got a 2.0 and a 1.9. So you can see how it gets progressively worse there. Contrast sensitivity, you'll often see that on a report as well. That's about how much, rather than, you know, how things are, it's about grayscale contrast. We use this test hiding hides with fading faces. You can also have a contrast letter chart that can often be reduced, and it's important, if that is reduced, that you're using things really bold, black and white. And you can see the difference. I'll just flick you back. That's how visual acuity, level of detail, starts to blur out, compared to when contrast blurs out. You've still got the detail, but you're losing the contrast. So as an example, if you have cataracts, contrast sensitivity is reduced because it's less light getting into the eye. We talked a bit about visual fields already. That's about the peripheral vision, and if you've got a hemianopia, often gets missed out in clinical tests because, again, the way someone neurotypical will be tested is sitting with a buzzer with their head in a machine for 10 minutes, building an accurate picture of the visual field. If we can do that, that's brilliant, and we can monitor glaucoma, etc. But if we can't, we still need to be testing it the old-fashioned way that a neurologist does it, with a pen torch or a finger and coming in, or a toy coming in from different angles, like you can see being done on the right there. This is an attempted simulation at that hemianopia that we were talking about, and how it cuts right through the middle. Yeah, CVI, mentioning it again, just and how we assess for that. We ask questions mainly. There's some great inventories that can be done to kind of build a better picture of how a child is processing visually. And I would signpost you towards that video that a young man with CVI himself, Alfie Fox, has posted on YouTube. It's a few years old now, but it's brilliant. I haven't seen anything equivalent to just give you an idea of how it affects him. And as we said, it doesn't mean that you should not be encouraging vision. In fact, quite the opposite. The more we stimulate the vision in CVI, the more we can encourage that neuroplasticity, and vision prognosis improves. So whether you've got cerebral or ocular visual impairment, these are the general principles. Keep things big, bold, bright, reducing clutter, simplifying things, and giving someone a chance. So you might need to delay the time each target is presented for. There's some great clips of people with visual processing delay, where they literally, a Jack in the Box will pop up and it's seconds before the child will jump. So bear that in mind, that you might need to wait for up to 8 seconds for the message to get through. Don't keep moving on. I tell myself that as well, because I tend to talk quickly and not always be as patient as I should be. That's just an example of what it might be like struggling with this visually, trying to read, you know, when all that's going on. So you need to give people more time and reduce that clutter. These are inventories that we use to build a picture of someone's vision if they do have visual processing issues. And this is a form that Shona's been working on, which is great. And we have a similar form, but this is really brilliant if someone is using eye gaze to really kind of try and tease out the key information that you need: the screen distance, the prescription, whether they have a full visual field, what level of detail they can see, and their contrast that we've just been talking about. So, you know, you can start kind of demanding that information for students so that you can properly tailor their eye gaze. So yeah, we need to think about what size they're needed, what glasses they need. If they do have a processing delay, how good is their eye movement control, and which eye do they use, and calibrate to that. They're the key things for, hopefully, for you guys to think about. And as a call to action there, really, if you're assessing a child and you don't know about their vision, then you can't assess them properly. You can't decide, you know, how they can best be using the tech. And yeah, every child should be getting their eyes checked annually, because every child, neurotypical, you know, they can change as they grow. A neurotypical child will typically start to say, I can't see the board, or I'm struggling. We have a myopia epidemic, but globally, in China, it's already reached something like 70% of teenagers need glasses for distance. That's in the neurotypical population. That's not gonna, you know, that's not missing our learning disabled population, because they're on screens all the time as well and not looking up enough. So that's compounding all of what we've talked about today as well, the general shift towards becoming myopic and needing glasses more. So everyone needs that annual test. It's not enough to have a baseline at one age and keep relying on that for years and years. Because, yeah, we want to give every child a chance to communicate. And as I said before, we don't want to see those students that I've seen who have missed out on eye gaze, have missed out on using communication tech because they couldn't see it when they were assessed for it. So I hope that's inspired you to think a bit more about vision. Thank you for listening. There's a little bit of time for questions if anyone has any. I don't know whether, Shona, shall I stop sharing, or?
I think I'd love actually if you could go back one slide to those key questions. I think they're really a key thing for people to take on board. And thank you again for a brilliant presentation. There's so much information to take on board from it. There's lots and lots of statistics that we can take out into the field and use as we're campaigning to get more people the eye tests that they need. We will be sharing this presentation on our YouTube channel as well, so you'll be able to go back and watch it a million times and really kind of get all the information from it. There's so much in there. So thank you so much, Lisa. As Lisa says, we do have time for questions. You are welcome to pop questions into the chat, and we will go through any questions you may have. Yeah, Amy, feel free to unmute. I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. A question. So I'm a speech therapist from South Africa, but I'm tuning in from Bali. I'm the news coordinator here, yeah. So like as a speech therapist, one of our go-to tools, for example, are bubbles. What I'm wanting to know, I'm curious about maybe tips and techniques that you use to encourage or get children to become a bit more familiar and comfortable to wear their glasses.
It's a really good question. It really depends on what the glasses are for, a little bit. So it's often a fairly tailored approach. We do have, if you look at our SeeAbility website, we do have a leaflet for getting used to glasses. So you can just, if you just Google SeeAbility, you'll find it in our eye care section. And there's a getting used to glasses leaflet, which you can give to school. One of the key things we find is, one of the things I find helps loads, is actually simulating what the child can see without the glasses to their class, to the teaching assistants and the teacher. That might not be practical for you, but for me, it really helps them to understand. The other thing is keeping it really positive, the associations. And putting them on when they need it the most. So, for example, if they're a child who really loves Mr. Tumble, putting the glasses on and playing Mr. Tumble at the same time. And if they're a child who needs the glasses most for that screen distance, you know, putting them on when they're using the screen, giving them lots of attention while they're using the glasses. The other thing, if it's a sensory thing, sometimes we've referred to OTs and we've worked with them, and they recommend just rubbing the bridge of the nose and behind the ears before you put the glasses on to desensitize. We've actually got a student at the moment who we've put their glasses lens in the middle of a frisbee because she just won't put anything on her nose. So we're just trying to get her to hold it up and look through. So watch this space for how that goes as a way of getting someone to see without having to have the glasses on their face, because we're struggling so much with this student. But I think it's about getting everyone around the team around the child on board and putting the glasses on when they can see something they're really engaged with. And if the glasses help more for close up, for example, you want to put them on not when they're walking around, but when they're in the class. If they work better for the distance, so the short-sighted myopic students, we often, their favourite teaching assistant will meet them off the bus, put the glasses on, and then they walk back to class pointing things out so that they're visually stimulated and distracted. But yeah, lots of little tips there, but do have a look at the leaflet as well. But I hope that's helpful. It's a very good question because it is a big challenge.
Yeah, that was super helpful. Thanks. I'll go have a look at the pamphlet.
Okay, thank you, Amy.
Great. Yelena, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much. Great lecture. I have a question, actually. What kind of activities would you suggest? Because you talked today a lot about CVI and the fact that neuroplasticity, especially early, is a factor that can change a lot for the child. So I assume there is type of activities that would help us to gain the most out of it. Is that so? And if so, what kind of activities can be promoted, especially maybe for the eye gaze users, and what the specialist can bring? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's making sure that you're presenting things that are at a level that's suitable for the child. So, I mean, in a lot of our schools, it is white room and dark room work to begin with. There's some studies where as well with coloured tents where students are in a tent, so all other stimuli, so the children with quite profound CVI in a tent, and you bring in single visual stimuli that are quite large and see if you can initiate tracking. So you could easily transfer that as well onto an eye gaze activity, you know, quite a large target moving very slowly, trying to move between two very large targets. And I think if you understand, going back to knowing what font size and contrast is needed, and you can develop simple activities on the screen that match that font size and contrast that are at that child's threshold. So basically it's stimulating at their visual threshold can help to lower that threshold so that next time, you know, they're able to see a little bit more. So I hope that answers the question. In terms of yeah, I think I don't know all the softwares well enough to know specifically what how that would tie in with your Tobii Dynavox software, but I can imagine it is, yeah, setting things at the threshold level and stimulating the child there. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
I would actually add to that some specifics for eye gaze. I would actually suggest then using the IFX2 software that we have. There's lots of games that you would actually be able to very much emulate those scenarios by having a dark room and having the background is always dark, and then you would have a high contrast color target for them to be able to interact with. And for many of the targets as well, you can also adjust their size. So going to Lisa's point about being able to change, kind of looking at the font size that they are being able to see, you could change the size of the target within the game as well to be able to match that. So you could have a much larger smiley face that they're following or they're tracking, or, you know, a much larger star, for example, that they're trying to target. So definitely look at look at the IFX2 software. There's lots and lots of features that you can do in there that would absolutely be able to work with kids with CVI.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Shona. That's really good to know. I'm actually going to see Lee Blemmings later today, and he's going to demonstrate some of the software to me. So that'll be good. I can then learn some more about that.
And if you haven't seen the software yet, reach out to either your regional partner or your regional account manager from Tobii Dynavox, and they'll happily be able to talk to you some more about it. We'll probably also be doing another session on IFX probably in the autumn time as well, so we'll make sure you all know about it for that time as well. Great. Does anybody else have any more questions? Feel free to also put them in the chat if you prefer. Just while anyone's thinking any questions, as Lisa showed, we are working on some resources to support this topic because it is so important. We know that, you know, we need our kids to have the eye test that they need, and we, especially when we're working with eye gaze, we need particular information, but that's also very, very relevant, as Lisa said, for our kids and our adults who are using our touch devices as well. So we are putting together some resources, and they will become available shortly. And that does include information that you can give to your eye specialist in your country, whoever will carry out the eye test, and to ensure that you get all the right information from them.
There is another question from Lena, actually, and it's a really good one, but I don't have an answer. If you suggest a book to educate, what would it be? And yeah, really, there isn't one. I would signpost you, as I say, to the resources on our website. We have two kinds of resources, really. Resources that are easy read on all different eye conditions for people with learning disabilities, and then information and advice and signposting to other websites. So in terms of CVI, I'd signpost you to the CVI Society. In the Scottish one actually has a very good website, but any of the national CVI societies often have good websites. But yeah, it's a very good point that there isn't really a book that sums up all of this. So, but yeah, do have a look at our SeeAbility website as well. But thank you.
Lisa, you mentioned, I missed the surname, Oliver.
Oliver Sacks, yeah. So, I mean, they're just really fascinating books. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, and I think it's Seeing It Different. I've forgotten the name of his book specific to vision, but they kind of explain some sort of neuroscience topics, but in a really, you know, they're best-selling books. They're not they're not textbooks, and they won't teach you the detail, but they do help you to understand just how amazing our brains are and understand, you know, so they're just fascinating.
Fantastic. Great. And we've added the SeeAbility's website link into the chat. Hopefully everyone will be flooding over there this afternoon to look at all the great resources. So I say between those and the resources that are coming, hopefully you'll have some great supports in there as well. So thank you again, Lisa. A brilliant presentation. Hopefully there's been lots of new information for everybody. As I say, we will make this available onto YouTube. Yeah, we hope that you can now got more information to be able to start campaigning in your own territories to get more kids eye tests, and we will get more success in AAC then. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me and for listening.